wrong part of the country, wrong job, wrong brand, wrong dealer. Bad stuff is my problem. I need good stuff. Our problem is this horrendous paradox. Damned if we do, and damned if we don't. Think about this. Let this give meaning to your struggle that got you here. You're not bad people trying to get good. You're sick people trying to get well. This is how we're sick at the level of the body and the level of the mind. And we get to be sick a little bit more this afternoon because we'll realize that we're sick at the level of the spirit as well. The stories of this reality in each of our lives go on and on and on. I asked how many of you have ever used more than you planned on using and saw most of the hands go up. That's the illness of the body. How many of you ever used despite saying you weren't going to do that again? Okay. Same hands. We sing the national anthem of addicts, I'll never do that again. And there's a country western version, I'll never do that again. I love country western because there are a lot of drunks in there who are feeling sorry for themselves, and they've got a tricky way of talking about it. But guess what's seeping into country western lyrics? There's a song out now, I think I got a thinking problem. Illness of the mind. And they've even got cowboys getting sober as well. So, this is the hopeless condition. Don't gloss over this lightly. Know that this is what you're up against. Just say no doesn't work with can't use, can't quit. Any more than the strategy for the homeless of just buy a house. And the reason that's funny is that just buy a house is not based on the truth about homelessness, and just say no is not based on the truth of addiction. There's another powerful phrase in the AA Comes of Age where this verdict of inevitable annihilation comes from, about what 12-step work is all about. 12-step work is all about carrying this message inherent in your own story. That you talk about the illness of the body and the illness of the mind. You talk about those examples personally, and another person can relate to that and say, man, that person's just like me. Maybe as some of you have related this morning to these concepts. There's also then the identification with the problem, but there's also some identification with hope, because the person who was just like you is no longer just like you. They haven't been using, etc. And Bill Wilson called that 12-step process tilling the black soil of hopelessness from which all spiritual growth flowers. So this morning we've been tilling the black soil of hopelessness because that is from which your spiritual growth will flower. I want to leave you with a quote because this is bad news. Damned if you do and damned if you don't is bad news. It's a tough reality. And you've been trying to live a normal life with this reality behind it. And that's why your lives have been unmanageable. This is what step one talks about. We admitted we were powerless. This is what's underneath powerless. That's why just to study the words in step one don't get you to the powerful depth of what addiction is all about. And that's defined in the doctor's opinion. Jean-Paul Sartre, a French existential philosopher, said, "Real living begins on the far side of despair." Real living begins on the far side of despair. This is our despair. This is what got us here. This can be the turning point. This can be the installation of willingness to do whatever these crazy folks want you to do so that you can get better. And I'll see you this afternoon when we'll talk about the solution. And please no unit brouhaha at the end of this prayer. Thank you. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So be it. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Fred Holmquist, and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. This morning we talked about the problem, and this afternoon we're going to talk about the solution. How many of you were here this morning who aren't here this afternoon? Oh, that's a trick question. It's almost not fair to do that to the brain, but how many of you weren't here this morning? Okay. I will do a quick summary of the information because this information is based on a sequence, and the sequence begins with identifying the problem, because there's a life truth that understanding the problem gives us the understanding of the solution. But imperfect understandings of problems give us imperfect solutions. And I think what happened to me, certainly in my alcoholism and drug addiction, was that I really tried to figure out what was going on, because what had been one of the most wonderful things in my life, which was my relationship with alcohol and certain drugs, had become one of the most horrible things in my life. And I had gotten more than I bargained on. And so I was trying to figure out what the problem was, and I tried a whole bunch of different solutions. I tried drinking hot toddies only while listening to Saturday night radio mystery theater, but then that turned into an all-night Saturday night drunk. I tried hundreds of things, and they were all imperfect because they were based on imperfect understandings of the problem. So coming to grips with what the real problem of addiction is really one of the key elements of defining a quality recovery. I've got a little quiz up here to summarize. It's an easy one, so for those of you who have test phobia, this is okay. I talked this morning about the big book being what kind of a book? A textbook, okay? And textbooks are to be studied from the beginning. And what's the beginning of the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous? The doctor's opinion, which in subsequent editions after the first edition are on page Roman numeral 23. But in the first edition, all 16 printings was on page 1. Now Bill's story is on page 1, but back up a few pages, and that's the doctor's opinion. The life adage that I just talked about says that what defines what? Problem defines the solution. So if your best understanding of a problem is a hot engine, then your best understanding of a solution is a cool engine. You could do all sorts of things to get a cool engine, like the silly thing I mentioned of driving my car into a lake, but that really didn't solve my problem. It just solved a symptom of the problem. Most of us were seriously trying to solve our problem of drug use and alcohol use, but we were concentrating on symptom reduction because we understood the problem in terms of symptoms, not in terms of the core problem itself. So we would get temporary symptom reduction because we'd be solving some of the symptoms, but we don't get a resolution of the problem because we're not talking about the core issue. The problem of addiction has how many parts? 2. Addiction is easy to understand. As I said this morning, it's impossible to live, it's impossible to live with, and it's impossible to learn from anything other than misery. And that's what typically got most of you here. The misery in your own life from using, or the misery in somebody else's life, the opportunity that your using gave them. The 2 parts of addiction are an illness of the body, which results in the conclusion that we can't use. Collectively, you're doing perfectly. And the other part of the illness of the problem is an illness of the mind, resulting in the conclusion, can't quit. These 2 simple phrases, these 4 words, are what got you here, are the essence of addiction. Damned if you do use, because of the physical allergy, the abnormal reaction with alcohol, the normal reaction with drugs. Once you put the substance in the system, you're not able to predict when you're going to stop once you've started, resulting in the symptom common to everybody in this room: have you ever used more than you planned on using? Now, I didn't know that that was going on in my life because I used for one reason. Why? Because it made me goofy, because I loved it. I drank because I loved what alcohol did for me. My wife used heroin because she loved what heroin did for her. We used the drugs that we used because of how they made us feel. So it was like 12 or 13 years into my drinking that I had any idea that it wasn't just my decision to continue to drink when I started to want to drink just a couple. And when I couldn't, then I began running into the reality that there was something else going on that I wasn't even aware of. Can't quit is the illness of the mind, means that somehow our minds are not able to see the truth about what's going to happen when we use again. A mental obsession. We become obsessed. One idea that forces out all other ideas. That this time when we use, despite all of the information contrary to that, this time things will be different. Anybody think of their own example of what they've told themselves as an example of the illness of the mind since this morning's lecture? Who would be willing to share it? What you told yourself just before the last time you used, or used again when you said you never would. What was the reasoning? Okay, it was my birthday. Perfect. You know, I worked out in the state of Washington on a farm, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, my favorite farmer would say, "Well, Fred, it's been noon for an hour in New York. Let's have a beer." You know, that was a perfect reason. Noon for an hour in New York. I'm sorry, ma'am, what was your...
I'll never take another drink.
Okay. I'll do this now, but then I'll stop. I'll never do it again. I can handle it. This time, all of those things won't happen to me. So this whole idea of the illusion, delusion, obsession gets us. It convinces us that this time everything's going to be different. The illness of the mind is believing a lie. When you act on a lie, you run into the truth. The truth is that we can't use. Now, there's a term that I didn't use this morning that really explains and is very consistently used